we also need to empower the men on how to coexist with those empowered women.
In an inflationary time, when prices rise, the producer should be incentivized to produce more for the market.
Many refugees are naturally trying to do business and trying to make their lives a bit different. For the system itself, it has to rethink how refugees can be a contributing factor in a positive way.
Africa is the youngest continent on Earth, with over 60% of its population under 25. But here's the crisis no one's ignoring anymore. Every year, about 11 million young Africans enter the workforce, hungry for opportunity. That's according to the African Development Bank. And what's waiting for them? Just 3 million formal jobs. That's over 7 million dreams deferred year after year after year. So today, we're putting the continent's most pressing questions on trial, from education reform to trade, marginalized voices, and health systems. We sat down with a few guests on the sidelines of the just concluded Africa Leadership Forum to understand who holds the keys to real inclusive growth. I'm George Indirango. To kick things off, Dr. Charles Mbeki breaks down the state of education on the continent and the next generation of leaders.
The world keeps evolving. Our needs keep evolving, but the education systems are playing a bit of catch up. Then there's this new advent of tech coming. There's a bit of a gap with toying around with the idea of redoing our curriculums, but it's not as easy as it sounds. But I'm speaking from this side, non-academia. Tell me, what's the situation on the ground?
The situation on ground is the realization that is urgent. I think we need to change the way we are conducting business. Because coming from EMS, we believe in numbers. Numbers do not lie. There's a report that the African Development Bank released on job creation on the continent. The report stated that on average every year in Africa, we have 10 to 11 million young people entering the workforce, and they're competing to only 3 million former jobs. So in Africa, when we look at the African economy on average, is really an agriculture-based type of economy.
Right.
So we realize that we have like 8 million jobs deficit that we have currently as we speak for us to be able to absorb the workforce. So what do you do? Can you sustain that? Can you continue delivering education program the same way we've been doing?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. What should you do? First, acknowledge it as a fact, and then look at the problem from an ecosystem perspective, because there are key players in the ecosystem. We have the students, the teachers. We also have infrastructure that one will acknowledge. Just pick the ratio of student and teacher across our schools. One will say, okay, it's different from rural to urban area. These are things that have been set for the past decades, that the digital transformation, the digital revolution makes it a challenge to say we cannot continue with the same type of setup to be able to deliver quality education for all. So what we are trying to acknowledge is present the problem from a demand and supply perspective.
Right.
Okay. And for me, education is access, quality, and relevance.
Right.
There's a lot of program about access, a lot of program about quality, trying to improve the curriculum and so on. Relevance is one thing that will drive this change that we're talking about.
Okay,
to
I
push
can
forward.
do that. So value-based leadership, entrepreneurship programs. Okay. Question, right? Because we have you, that means AIMS would be designing or redesigning the current curriculum, but also a foot into the labor market.
Correct.
How do you extend your capacity to also have a foot in there?
Okay, it's through partnership. So I will try to underscore the flexibility of AIMS to design curriculum that talks of quality or relevance.
And by the way, we are hoping to look to you to also share best practices with other people within the education space.
Correct. So the way we do that at AIMS is because the way AIMS was actually created, again, let's acknowledge, we are not solving all the problems. MC is a postgraduate training program.
Right.
So we are receiving students who complete the undergraduate from traditional universities. They come to MS for 1 year. It's a very intensive master's program. We're making transition to employment a pillar. Remember what I was saying, the so what of education. We cannot afford to have a quality of MS graduate with postgraduate. They're coming up with very good skills and competency at the end of the program, not to pair them with the opportunity that exists. Because we know, for example, in the area that we're working at, data science is a lot of needs. If you look at the market needs in terms of data science, is not even what EMS can actually produce. So we're already operating in an area that demand is already there. Now, making it happen is really through partnership because we have this framework called work integrated learning. For people listening to me, will say, okay, what is it? Is it internship? Is it applied research? Work integrated learning is a framework that help us establish a relationship between the academic learning and then a work environment. Internship is just one of the components, but we also have a cooperative education. If we manage to develop a curriculum or academic program that respond to the need of the market, then you are providing young people the opportunity to accelerate the transition to employment quicker.
All right.
That's what we're doing at EMS.
From your perspective, what does quality education look like for Africans in peri-urban and rural settings?
So it's a complex thing. I think many people might maybe define quality from different perspectives. So for me, I will start with a curriculum. So when you say an education program, what are you teaching? Okay? And who are the students? What are the requirements for people to participate in that program? In terms of the student recruitment, who are the teachers? Are people teaching the subject matter expert, developing the curriculum that is relevant? Are the students actually meeting the requirement to be in that classroom so that they can actually learn more? Those are the dimensions I will look in terms of quality of a curriculum.
And that's why you need partners, because other partners would say we need infrastructure.
Correct.
Right on ground for some of the peri-urban students or the rural students. So you need partners for that.
Yeah.
Final question, upskilling and bringing up to par the teachers. So a lot of people don't focus on the education providers, but some of them might be stuck in a curriculum that existed before. So do you have an element of that?
We do have an element because of the realization that MC is at the end of a pipeline, a postgraduate, that's the end, right?
Yeah.
We, for our own benefit or strategic plan, we partner with institutions like the Mastercard Foundation to realize that if we really wanted to have a gender-responsive postgraduate training program in an area like STEM, you cannot wait for where people are already at the undergraduate level. So we have a program called the Teacher Training Program, for example, to look at the pipeline perspective, go to primary and secondary school, and try to influence change at that level,
Right.
where you equip the teachers with the skills or upskills them, to just borrow your word, to embrace technology, for example, to have manage a smart classroom for them to promote really digital learning, digital literacy, which maybe by the time that they were trained, they were not actually exposed to that.
Right.
Because we don't want to have a society where learners are challenging the teachers. We really wanted to empower the teacher to always be that kind of vocal voice or provide leadership in the class where knowledge is really onboarded by the teacher. So yes, the teacher training program is one of the program that we're doing at EMS where we're looking maybe below the line and then prepare the student. Is gender responsive because in science we have only few women
Right.
taking the course, but where they make the change is actually on the pipeline level. So we are making it gender responsive. We're making it more attractive for female learners so that when they actually make their choice, they can consider STEM as a pathway for the education.
So Dr. Charles has set context, but for great education systems to ripple over, it demands more than just talk. It demands leaders who can rewire education, economies and policies to turn potential into power. Here's Mafa Chipeta, FAO Sub-Regional Coordinator for Eastern Africa, and Itumeleng Dlamini, as we discuss economic dissection of the continent and reviewing each other's progress as countries. There's one breakdown that you did. Of 100, Europe has 30, another area has 30, Asia has its own, Brazil and Africa are splitting 10. Please just break that down again for us within the context on
what Africa is actually taking home in terms of a global GDP so that we know where we're starting from?
The production in Asia could be 30 or 25. In Europe, it will be about 20 or 35.
That's percentage, right?
Yeah, percentage. In North America, about the same. So these three will take around 90% of what the world produces. The other 10% to make 100 is accounted by the rest of the world, including Africa.
A lot of what we spend on, which is something I'm sure you're extremely keen on, a lot of what we spend on does not reach the community level because the projects that we're investing them in, and you put it in such a way that said it's extremely grandiose, that it doesn't reach the people it needs to serve, and reporting doesn't even reflect that we were not able to reach them. It just starts at this point. But there's a bit of a disconnect, but we'd like to know where we're going wrong.
The more interesting thing I said was, in fact, the disconnect between the producer of what little we produce and what the market is saying. Yeah? In an inflationary time, prices are rising. When prices rise, the producer should be incentivized to produce more for the market, to catch that money. Our people are not doing that because there's no market transmission to them. The traders in between simply buy from Asia and sell. We've been saying we import too much rice in Africa. We don't produce enough. You can buy Asian rice in Africa easier than you can buy domestic rice. So where are the jobs for our local people? Because the middlemen don't care where they get their money. They can get a bigger profit from Asia because the prices are lower there. It's a bigger producer. And they have no conscience of what they're doing to their own economy.
Within the context of what different countries are doing, I'm sure you're extremely privy to what's happening geopolitically. With this new president in the West saying what he's saying with tariffs and imposing a few, let's say, objectives or rationale, to different countries. But you said that we do need our version on a currency, not necessarily even our own African currency, but something that we can peg on that's not externally forced or faced. What does that look like? Because I have something also, yeah.
We should value money.
We should value money.
It is not necessarily convertible money that we need. Many of the things we need to pay for do not need convertible currency. Yeah? Why do I, if I want to buy Kilombero rice from Tanzania, from Malawi, why do I need to first convert to dollars? And the Tanzanian seller has to convert to dollars too. Each one of us paying taxes in the bank. Why can't I get paid in our local currencies? And the reality is, if Malawi exports to Tanzania 2 million, Tanzania exports to Malawi 5 million, then you can use currencies for up to 2 million, up to the lower of the two. After that, you can worry about paying in dollars. But for that 2 million, which is the lower of the two figures of exchange, pay in local currency. Because you get your money back.
Okay.
Malawi buys 2 million, so you get your money back. At a time when the African economy has stalled, it is not growing. Sometimes it is in regression. The banks are reporting obscene profits. Yet they insist on the very high interest rates, very high bank charges. Even a person running a small account is paying every month. For the bank is supposed to provide that service. Why do I have to pay an extra? I'm actually lending them money to do business with. So high bank charges. Also, the transaction costs that they put on everything that you exchange. This is money that should be getting used for development, not for making the banks wealthy, but for developing the country. You cannot have banks prospering when the economy is tanking. It does not make sense.
Geopolitically, with this introduction of tariffs and everyone kind of now scrambling for their own way of sustainability, what's that bit of advice you would give to us if we want to reduce reliance on foreign aid?
First thing is, under this condition of tariffs that are being imposed, Africa should hold together. The idea of Africa going there, individual countries, to negotiate a special favor is the worst possible scenario. Because our economies are like this. The economy of Malawi is smaller than the city of Chicago. So how do you say we're negotiating with the US government? Yeah? The economy of Malawi is about the size of the economy of Johannesburg within Africa. So our countries are not big enough to talk to the United States as a country. Let us not break ourselves apart. Let us so stand together. Say, let's take advantage of these tariffs to protect ourselves also. We don't buy from outside without putting a blockage so that our own industries can grow. And then we insist, whoever we give a license to produce must charge reasonable rates. Don't overcharge, because then you're killing the whole enterprise.
That's true. What's the future of banking in Africa?
It will continue in a selfish way to make obscene money, unfortunately.
Okay. Both local and foreign banks?
Both local and foreign banks. They overcharge for their services. And unless we do something in policy terms to stop it, it will continue.
So who handles that? You said policy, but you're deeply within the ecosystem that also advises?
Yes, governments should act on banking, making obscene profits when economies are tanking. They have to.
But that's not an Africa-specific issue. Around the world...
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
Why is China doing so well? They've got state banks. You control the interest rates. You control what sector you invest in. You say, we are into electric vehicles, the money will be found and it will go there. Yeah? You're in solar panels, the money will be found, it will go there.
So siphoning and mismanagement.
You want to have more rice because geopolitically you are not sure about your sources of food. You go, you put the money there and you grow the food in China to the extent possible.
Right. Ms. Itumeleng Dlamini is the advisor for the African Peer Review Mechanism under the African Union. Just delivered fantastic remarks during the sessions here at the African Leadership Forum in Uganda. She's here with us. Thank you very much for joining us. How are you finding it so far?
Thank you so much for inviting me. I work for the African Peer Review Mechanism, and our mandate is to go out to African countries, assess them for their performance and their progress around the governance standards that have been set either at the African Union level and also at national level. We need to have policies that we can relate to. Africa has its own value system, Ubuntu. So regardless of where you come from on the continent, if you come from Southern Africa, we call it Ubuntu. We're in Uganda today. In Uganda, they have exactly the same philosophy. It's called Ubuntu. If you are in Tanzania or Kenya, you'll speak of Ujamaa or Harambee.
Right.
And the feedback that we're consistently getting was our development must actually give expression to who we are. That is our starting point. And I was saying earlier on, it was a very uncomfortable place to be in as an advisor, as a policymaker, because often when we speak about business processes, when we speak about management, business management, the idea of values such as Ubuntu doesn't often come into play. You know, and so we had to ask ourselves, is there a place for African values in modern and current business management and entrepreneurship? And so that process really necessitated a lot of introspection, not just only at an individual level, but also at
Holistically,
holistically within our own institutions, even because even as we were speaking with people on the ground, we were slowly recognizing that if we are to move forward, we really need to say, who are we as a people on the continent?
Right.
And so that's how we've come up with the African principles on corporate governance that are really values-driven, the shared values in the African communities that are mission-centered, that say, if you are an African, and we have given citizenship, African citizenship, to corporates, to listed entities, then we expect out of those corporate citizens to also abide by Ubuntu.
Right. Okay. So, question, almost every organization that sets up on the continent speaks to a young woman or a woman, or speaks to community on paper.
Right.
On ground, it's a completely different story because we're still tackling some of the issues that we had a few years ago. You mentioned about making progress, but where is the gap in getting as deeply entrenched as possible? It's still not commensurate to what is portrayed on paper. What's happening on ground?
So what's happening on the ground is, we are struggling as African countries with issues around participation in leadership systems in Africa, participation in thought leadership, which is why I was saying I think the hackathon must really deal about issues on who we are.
Yeah.
We're struggling with participation around how do we ensure that women, senior women in business, junior women in entrepreneurship, women traders who sit at the borders of our countries and trade on a whole range of products. How do we ensure that these people now become part of the broader system which has been created to build or to build prosperity? And one of the things that we need to do, I believe, and which at APRM we have started to speak about, is women or policies designed around women empowerment are necessary, but they are not enough. So we have to ensure that we bring on board all sectors of society, the private sector, major businesses, and we create linkages between big companies and a small SMME company owned by a woman. And we ensure that over and above that, because access to finance is one of the biggest issues, so you can create the linkages and ensure that there's a transfer of skills to a woman-owned business. But what a big company cannot do is to provide access to finance. You need a bank. The bank still requires this young woman or a woman-led business to still have some kind of a guarantee, right? So what we almost need to design are systems that speak to tripartite or holistic arrangements to solve our problems. So if we can look at those kinds of, well, not policies, but those practices that are starting to emerge from businesses that are really committed to inclusive growth, because that's when we start to see what participation looks like in reality. So if we can start to look at and find some of those case studies and say, well, Sierra Leone, Uganda, or whatever other country, can we have and roll out a similar exercise? The banking sector, you are sitting really on gold mines, the information that you have. So how can you be of assistance beyond the banking sector in transforming our economies?
Fantastic. Final word in probably less than a minute. We've been talking about this youth bulge, which seems almost clear that every leader should be listening to the young person, but that cross-generational conversation in some instances has not been happening. What would be your advice to leaders on accountability, but from a young person's perspective?
I find it really encouraging when I see youth participating in these conversations, but we need to move a step further and allow for space for these young people to now start serving in important leadership roles, both in government and in business.
Right.
Because the ideas that they come up with are ideas that that need to be implemented not by the older generation, but by the people who understand the ideas that they come up with.
And whom it will affect in the years to come.
In years to come, not so far away. I mean, you, well, maybe not you, but me, I may be gone in 40 years' time. But these people, these young people, will be around then. And they are the people that will need to also translate and to also ensure that at a later stage, they have next generations to empower. And you know, it's also important, I think, when we have these conversations, to also acknowledge that the growth and the aspirations we seek will take generations.
Right.
That they will not, that we will not be in a position to fulfill them or to see them come to fruition. I hope, I wish we could, but if we acknowledge that this is intergenerational work, then we will be in a better place to actually bring them closer a lot sooner than we think we should.
Right.
And they know this, the youth know this, and we need to believe them when they say we are ready.
Time now for a short break. We'll be back with more right after this. Welcome back to State of Africa. We turn our attention to an important conversation featuring Jean-Marie Ishimwe, the East Africa Regional Lead for Refugees Seeking Equal Access at the Table, also known as RSEAT. In East Africa alone, more than 3 million people are currently displaced due to conflict, persecution, and environmental challenges. This region is home to the largest refugee population on the continent, and efforts to ensure their voices are heard within decision-making processes have never been more critical.
We've been having a lot of conversations. You've been part of the Africa Leadership and Dialogue Institute convenings with at least some of the refugees, and you've engaged with RLOs. Your knowledge on what's happening on this other side of the ecosystem is deep, and I need to tap into that brain for a second. When we are mapping out leadership, for example, at a convening like this, it's very likely that some of those voices get lost. Going by what you've seen the last few days at the Leadership Forum, do you think they're represented well enough, or where do you see some of the gaps?
Well, man, first, thank you very much for having me. I think certainly the refugee voices continues to be an invisible voice that is too powerful to be invisible. Refugees have voices in the communities, but unfortunately, it comes to high-level meetings, big meetings, the voices are suppressed.
Okay.
The suppression is not really someone suppressing, but really a question of access and a question of the recognition of their voices. As you rightly said here at the Africa Leadership Forum, I think I see a lot of intentionality for inclusion of various voices, marginalized to say, but I think the refugee voice is a little bit still a bit not the level where would need to have. I mean, I asked the question in one of the sessions about what is the economic value for Africa to, rethink how refugees contribute to their societies, and not to think about foreign support as the only way around. And I think that if you think about that question more deeply, it's a question of has our African state, and especially now within this dispensation of where we have uncertain times, funding cuts, talked to the people that the solutions we're trying to build are supposed to assist them.
Allow me to put a pause there, because you've said some very crucial points. Just paint a picture for us on just how much contribution, whether economically, socioeconomically, that refugee population contributes to the region.
Yes. No, I think I would put it on different strands maybe. I think economically there's a lot of viability for both the skills that they have, but also for what could be revenue in terms of systemically if they're included within the tax or economic fabric within our countries. So economically, there's a big viability for that, and I think we need to see the value of that. As is socially, I mean, if you think about some of the regions or areas where refugees settle, most of those communities really appreciate to stay together with those refugees. And I think this idea of working with host communities and refugees can bring a lot of social cohesion into the communities so that services and programs are both shared together.
Then let's drill that a bit more. Let's just drill on that a bit more. So there are some concerns that take almost immediate to handle. If you say, okay, we'd like to have a group of young refugees whom we can take to a certain place and express their voices, that's almost immediate. We can have a group of people, but when we talk about assimilating them into the economy or refugee status, that takes a bit longer, even though there have been systems in practice for years and years. What is the holdup? And feel free to be as candid as possible.
Yeah.
What's been your experience with where that pain point is that we don't seem to understand from outside?
To be honest, I think, let me start by saying that we experience what I would call a genuine welcome for our own people. The system is crafted in a way that makes refugees to be dependent on aid.
Okay.
When you put refugees in a camp for 30 years, mindset-wise, psychologically, I think it's a big thing that affects their mental state. And for me, I mean, I would be very blunt to say that I've been a refugee for more than 20 years in Kenya. And what that means is that you have what you'd call hopeless hope.
Okay.
So if you don't have a documentation, you cannot access anything virtually. But I think the bigger question really is that why does the system categorize you as less of a human being, whereas there's so much you can contribute in that country?
You've really alluded to, I think, a fantastic segue on policy and national mandates.
Yeah.
You've lent your mind and your perspective to different organizations and, of course, within this conversation on what's happening within different countries, one of which is in Kenya with the Shirika Plan, for example. What are some of the gaps that keep reappearing? Anytime you make some bit of progress, you have to go back a few steps and then keep moving forward. So just help us understand what your experience has been with the Shirika Plan and where we are and what we should be looking forward to.
Yeah. So the Shirika Plan is a very transformative plan, as the government says, to change the refugee camps into settlements. So ideally to have a situation where refugees are able to socially and economically be included into national system. But then the part of that is how host communities can also benefit from refugee programs and vice versa to that degree. I think the biggest bottleneck that we still find until now is that there's, of course, the funding question that's going to come up for how do you implement some of these things, because they need some level of systemic restructuring. And I'll tell you... I
like that you've said systemic again.
Yeah, and I'll say this why. Because there's a very specific challenge we have in Kenya. The refugee database and the Kenyan database does not speak to each other.
Okay.
So you find that you might be having a refugee ID. If you go to KRA today, or the Kenya Refugee Revenue Authority, you cannot get your document there. So it means that you cannot be able to apply for your tax PIN, your e-citizen, your driving license, and all these things. These are systemic issues that, if not addressed, even Shirika Plan will not be able to bring the solution that it's trying to bring. So that has to be addressed. And it goes back to the implementation.
I just have two questions for you. One of the things is, we have a lot of convenings that can actually move the needle on a lot of things.
Correct.
Do you feel like people listen more on the continent or outside the continent? Because there are very different agendas, right? And I know it's a very tricky question because it kind of puts you in a tight spot. But I'd like to know, when you get into these forums anywhere around the world, are people actually listening? And where have you seen people listen and actually move to action?
Well, I mean, you will tempt me to say internationally because there's much more facing of whoever says what. So there's always that question of, if I say something at the international level, this is something that is binding us as a country or as a people, whoever is saying it. So there's some level, I mean, even when you talk about participation, it actually has moved much more in the international space. I'll tell you, in 2019, when there was the first Global Refugee Forum, there's only 72 refugees that attended that out of 4,000 people. In 2023, when we had the second Global Refugee Forum, we had a whopping 324 refugees that attended. So it's an increase from 72 to 324. In terms of refugee advices, we had none in 2019. We had at least 14 in different, 14 states. And this is, of course, with the works that we're doing. But I think I see a lot of, there's movements at the international level, but I think the biggest movement in terms of those discussions, I think is the discussion we have at country level and regional level. How does those discussions international level, but also even our own discussion down here, push the needle much more further in terms of refugee inclusion? But just for example, the Africa Leadership Forum, I see more genuine approach towards solving the question of Africans and refugees being part of that. And if there's more push to that idea of engagement, I think we're going to be able to receive a moment where we're actually saying as Africans, we're being able to find a solution for our people. And I think that's not the same way you'd see it with, for example, in the international. It takes a lot of steps. So I'll say that there's much more listening in the international level because of the obligations, the commitments that these countries do and NGOs. But I think the greatest conversation to move the needle is conversations like the ALF and many others that we need to have in the region.
Let's now shift gears and welcome Michael Adeneu, Country Director of Oxford Policy Management in Ethiopia, to discuss the crucial balance between development and policy, followed by insights from Dr. Karabo Tokwane, Director of Clinical Services at the Ministry of Health in Botswana, on strengthening health systems.
We've been interrogating what collaboration with different stakeholders in the ecosystem look like. One thing that we run the risk of, especially with a younger population that's getting into leadership, and then leadership trying to solve for a different generation, for example, is the lack of commonality on what development looks like. Have you understood what that commonality looks like?
It's an interesting question. There's always going to be, and that's always been the case, where generation difference have got different perspective. But tackling important issues like this would require both the contribution of the youth, which would be able to be impacted by the decisions that's been made, but also old and wise people who've got the experience. Now, I think the discussions have been, there is what it seems to be a disconnect, but not always. Having that wide perspective would only going to enrich and be able to solve the problem in a much better way. So my take is, even though there seems to be a challenge on different perspective, but the end goal would be the same. For older generation, the interest in being able to live a much more prosperous, safe, and hospitable environment is the end game that would be championed by both. So I don't necessarily see it as being a difference.
Okay. You had the conversation on environment and sustainability earlier.
Yes.
And I know within your space, technology has been, front and center.
Yes.
But there's the risk of inequality as we continue to advance technologically on the continent. But you're tackling that, at least trying from root till the highest level person in policy. Just explain to us how that progress has been.
The role of technology, especially in the space of climate change and adaptation, have been significant. For example, some of the works that we've been doing, there is always a time lag between getting the right information for policy and mitigate the circumstances before they happen. Now, advances looking into the policy realm, generating the evidence have been supported by technology. For example, using remote sensing satellite technologies. We have the capability and capacity being able to predict in much more accurate manner into the future or what to come. For example, leveraging weather patterns and small area estimation, underlining statistical data, we've managed to see events before they happen. This is a new capability which has not been there, which means policymakers now can be able to influence decisions and be able to have a proactive engagement, being able to address some of the challenges that we face.
All right. Final question. You've alluded to the policymaker, but we'd like to tackle the other side, the young people. They form a very crucial part of what happens next. But whenever we mention young people within certain forums, it always feels like, okay, that young person who's maybe not completed school, just right about finishing school, has no job experience. So that's where the mind shifts, and we've heard it from a few people. But there's some people doing phenomenal work who just happen to be young. We just want to know where the space is, even within what you've mapped as OPM, Oxford Policy Management, where the space for young people is before they come knocking down those doors.
It's an interesting question. I have to admit, there is a lot that needs to happen, especially in the continent. The continent average age is about 17.5 years old, which means not only at the latter end of the segment, which have got little or no experience, but there are, as you've said, an amazing young talented individuals that are really creating a significant change across the board that is also looking to make a difference in much broader sense. So how we would be able to see and engage youth would evolve. Some countries better than others have got an intentional mechanism that has the necessary process that would be able to capture the youth voice, not only be able to inform policy, but to drive it as well.
Right.
When it comes into OPM in particular, it's a mixed culture that we have. So we value one thing. I think it's well to know, even though we came out of Oxford University about 47 years ago or so, 2/3 of our workforce resides in the local countries that we operate. And growingly, substantially, we value and be able to understand the local context. So if you take the office in Ethiopia in particular, where I sit in, there is a diverse group of people from a diverse walk of life. We have very senior individuals who got 40 years experience,
Right.
and young, upcoming, influential consultant who are doing a great job as well. There is room for all, and we should be able to be intentional, making sure that it's reflected.
Right. Are we able to summarize the role of academia in development of Ethiopia or the region?
I've tried to allude to this in the panel in generally as a reflection that academia have got a major role to play. But research for academia would always look into creating that knowledge base that is unique and that can contribute to our understanding of the issue. But in the realms of policy, we have to be able to articulate what is happening, why is it happening, but also, most importantly, how we'll be able to solve the issues. So there is a role for academia. There's definitely a role for practitioners. There is a role for civil societies. And there is a role for youth engagement and the like. All work that we do across the board would have to take into account all contribution from all society and walk of life. So this is not to say there is a strong role for academia and research, but also understanding the public sector and its requirement, and be able to clearly outline and translate what needs to be done is, I think, an area that requires further work on this space.
We've been seeing a lot of young women in Botswana getting into leadership. Just let's start there. Is that by design? What's happening that other countries should serve as best practice for other countries?
Botswana is signatory to the SADC Protocol on Gender, as well as the Beijing Declaration. So we take gender very seriously. And the portfolio of gender has actually been elevated to a ministerial portfolio. So I think it's a huge development that actually brings a light to gender issues, especially leadership. However, having said that, in terms of whether we get women and especially young women getting into leadership position because it's an affirmative action, the answer would have to be no.
Okay.
No, it's purely based on merit. The spaces are very competitive, and I'd like to say women in Botswana and the young girls are quite competitive. I'll even give an example of my 10-year-old. When this year started, she said, I want to be top of my class. So they're growing with that mentality that, I have to excel. When I was growing up, it was actually quite common to think that the boy in the class has to be first in class. But then as you grow up, you start asking yourself, but why? And why can't I do it? Because I can do what he can do. So why not? So I think with the mindset change that women are having and the acceptance that the men are having, it actually creates an enabling environment. Is everything perfect? No. Everything is not perfect, because as we have more empowered women, we also need to empower the men on how to coexist with those empowered women, because it's not every man that can coexist with empowered women. We are still a very traditional nation, so culture still plays a role in terms of traditional gender roles, such that as a woman, even if you advise, if you hold a higher position than a man, they might view it as you challenging their authority at home. So as we have women being in leadership roles and them being more empowered, we also need to empower the men so that they're able to coexist with these empowered women.
Nice. Right, I like that that's the starting point of our conversation. Now let's go to another conversation that has now come up, but we love that it's taking center stage, mental health. Within the aspect of leadership, the older generation or generations that came before us, mental health was not something that was even discussed, let alone on the agenda, on a leadership forum program. So how has that been for you, especially understanding how clear it is for us to discuss, but then telling the leaders, oh, think about this too. With everything else, add this.
Yes. So for me, it goes back to culture. Culturally, they say you strike a woman, you strike a rock, because we are supposed to be very, very strong. And it's something similar for the men as well. Mental health was something that was not acknowledged. It was seen as weakness. But now, I think with health promotion, we are giving everyone permission to say, I am not feeling well. And we're saying, it's okay to not be okay. And I believe that it's having those conversations that unlocks those taboo areas that traditionally we could not talk about. And sometimes you also have to show the leadership the advantages of going into those taboo conversations, because what you stand to gain is a lot more than what you stand to lose. Or if you were not to have the conversation and things keep on going the way they are going right now. Mental health is expensive. The effects of mental health are expensive. And if you are able to demonstrate that if someone is not feeling well, if someone is depressed, if someone has a psychotic break, what does it mean? It means time away from work. And time away from work means loss of income. And loss of income means you can't pay school fees for your kids. Like, there's such a huge ripple effect. And if we don't have those conversations, and if we don't demonstrate those things, then it becomes very hard for people to understand. But I am liking that. I think Gen Alpha and Gen Z, they are, in my language, what we call sekhatlamela masisi. They break down barriers. They break glass doors. Sekhatlamela masisi. So they don't knock. Or if they knock, they will knock once and then they will go in. So they force you to actually stand up and listen. The way we used to do things and the way that things used to be done by those who came before us, it does not work for them. And unlike our generation, where we were very apologetic in our needs and the needs of our society, they are not apologetic. They are saying, oh, there's no chair for me. I am coming, I am creating a table, I am bringing the chair, and I am inviting you to my table, not coming to your table. So I believe that them holding us to a higher account as a sector and holding the leadership to a higher account is what has brought a lot of these developments. And it's like paying it forward. It's like a ripple effect.
Right.
It starts from one place and it just spreads. And you know, grandparents always want to make their grandkids happy. It's very important to understand that health is not just about health. It is so multifaceted. Health comes at the tail end of something not going right in other sectors. Whether it's food insecurity, then you get malnutrition. Whether it's climate change and you get floods and you have bloodborne diseases. So if we work on all these other sectors, then the job for us as the health sector is very, very minimal, because we are the end result of what is happening in other sectors. So if people, or if sectors were to actually measure how they are performing, they should actually look at the health sector.
And then it becomes less of a financial conversation. It's more of a down the line and ecosystem conversation.
Exactly, exactly.
Advice for young Africans who are looking to get into leadership?
The first thing I'd have to say is be bold, be courageous, and in everything that you do, do the right thing. And lastly, being allowed to serve is a privilege. When you are in leadership, you are in a position of power. But do not think that power belongs to you. You only have that power because the people have given you the permission and the platform and the opportunity to serve them. So your power only comes from the people being kind enough to allow you to serve them.
Now, as we close, we ask the leaders we've spoken to today for one word of advice that young people hoping to get into leadership would benefit from.
I find it really encouraging when I see youth participating in these conversations, but we need to move a step further and allow for space for these young people to now start serving in important leadership roles, both in government and in business.
Please be honest. Please be patriotic. Don't just mouth patriotism while you're doing self-serving maneuvers in the country. The country needs you for them, not for you.
It's very important to understand that health is not just about health. it is so multifaceted. Health comes at the tail end of something not going right in other sectors.
I see more genuine approach towards solving the question of Africans and refugees being part of that. And if there's more push to that idea of engagement, I think we're going to be able to receive a moment where we're actually saying as Africans, we're being able to find a solution for our people.
Research for academia would always look into creating that knowledge base that is unique and that can contribute to our understanding of the issue. But in the realms of policy, we have to be able to articulate what is happening, why is it happening, but also, most importantly, how we'll be able to solve the issues.
That's all from us here at State of Africa. Absolutely brilliant perspectives and words of encouragement from different leaders at the Africa Leadership Forum in Uganda. My name is George Ndirango. Be sure to stay in touch and give us your feedback on the Africa Leadership and Dialogue Institute's social media pages. And until next time, thanks for tuning in.